Hello viewers, the module that we finished just now was about how to visualize urban tissues in urban fabric, and in the past we spoke about urban open space in general, about how the various different kinds of open spaces that exist, and we are going to talk specifically on the four types of urban spaces, urban open spaces, starting with streets, public places, public plaza, parks and gardens, design of their public plaza, parks and gardens, waterfront and its edges, and urban forestry and agriculture, urban agriculture. So in this particular section, I will be talking mostly on urban transport and urban streets. These are urban transport and streets are a very important part of the urban landscape, because first, urban street are the biggest urban open space that exists and often are neglected or neglected child of the urban areas in general. And transport specific thing we talk about, because like in the past videos we saw and we spoke about cities nurturing private vehicles, and wherein a lot of cars that are being put onto the road, it is specifically because of lack of quality urban public transport. It is difficult to design a space that will attract people, but what is remarkable is how often this has been accomplished. What attracts us to spaces? It's the green space that attracts us to that area. It's the solitude, it's the sovereignty of that space that attracts us. But every time you go onto the street, every time you're on the road, it's just crazy. The traffic is crazy, the movement is crazy. So I'll just talk about transport and streets. In these two photographs that you see, you find a lot of congestion on both sides of the traffic. There's no divider per se. You can't see which is coming in and which is going out, which is why and the first photograph is in Hyderabad. Photograph is taken from the Charminar, and the second is any urban street that you could relate to. Now I'll show you how a good public transport can change the way streets are used, the way the streets are moved around. So you can understand a city only if you use the public transportation system of that city. This is by Lausanne. We're going to show you a video which is Bogota in Colombia. Bogota also was a city which didn't have a great public transport system before the BRTS came in. Enrique Penalosa was the mayor of Bogota who introduced the BRTS system in Bogota, and that changed and transformed Bogota forever. When you look at the city had similar problems of congestion. You had a lot of cars. The traffic movement was less than 15 kilometers an hour in the CBD areas, which is your central business districts areas, and you had enormous problems that all the developing nations of the world have. Then came along, you didn't have proper bus stops. You had cars which if parked or are broken occupies the whole lane. And so when they introduced the BRTS, this is the BRTS system in Bogota, it transformed the city altogether. See the way how it loads in, doors automatically open, people walk in. It's at the same level, the design, just look at it. So it is the Transmilenio, the BRTS system is user friendly. Not just that, it also is barrier free, so people who are disabled could also get into the system. It's a low floor coverage, so here you have, and they have the cashless medium. So it's a smart system that exists. So, and there's a dedicated lane for the Transmilenio. This is the cashless system. So the fare is automatically collected when you chip in, and when you get out, you have to when you get out of the stations, you have to put in the card again. So from the entry to the exit, whatever the fare is, it gets deducted automatically. That's the intelligent transportation system that exists. Yeah. Here you have small viewers repairing the BRTS station, and this, having a beautiful view across. In fact, people who use Transmilenio, it's faster to move through Transmilenio than to actually own a private vehicle and drive around in Bogota. So we are going to talk in general about transit corridors and transit corridor designs, how it should be designed, what should it accommodate. As we showed you in the video already, the bus station generally bulbs out of the normal pavement, right? And your bus system walks, the bus comes into, it has a length of about 40 feet. So it has to be about, as per the regulation, about 70 feet or 75 feet away from the signal. And when the bus opens up, people enter in, it should be at the same floor level as that of the platforms. In this particular photograph, you see that there is a dedicated bus lane like the Transmilenio and BRTS systems, or if you see the Indian example of BRTS, we have Ahmedabad, the Janmarg BRTS, which is now won several awards across and has transporting about 1.9 million people every day. This is a great system. Okay, so we look at streets in general and what sort of systems that exist on the street, how it is designed, what kind of landscape and what kind of architecture should be carried onto the street. This is Champs LCs that we talked about in the past. Starts from the Triumph Arc and goes on till to the Louvre, or rather the Palace of Louis XVI. When you look at it, you have this nice boulevard pruned with nice trees all along. The cycle lanes that exist, and the sidewalks which have not just people walking around, but these extended eaves that you see out are for these eateries and cafeteria where people sit around and enjoy the open space. And it's also marked by and edges of these old looking buildings, and which lets you to admire the beautiful architecture abutting the street. This is La Rambla, Barcelona. Now this particular street, there is a very interesting facet to this particular street. This street is right in middle of the road. Okay, then this acts like a public plaza. The trees sort of creates a buffer between the traffic and the people, so it acts like a security measure. The most interesting part that you see are these dustbins. So at every 20 meters you have a dustbin, which lets you, so that there's no pilferage and there's no people spitting and throwing things around. Yeah, then there are nice, the sidewalk is often also used for crossing. So the distance between the sidewalks or between the two distance is not more than 6 meters. That's essentially kept at 6 meters. Of course, La Rambla doesn't invite a lot of traffic, as in motor vehicle traffic. It invites a lot of pedestrian traffic, and people love this open space. See the eateries around it. You put a umbrella and you could sit around and spend your entire day, evening, just looking at people. It's beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to show you another example of a city. The whole city itself celebrates the open space. This is Copenhagen that we are going to talk about, and I will show you the video about Copenhagen and how it has transformed the city structure. So Copenhagen, when it was in 1960s, was as friendly to motor vehicles as our current day Delhi and Mumbai were, but it again transformed over the days when they allowed bicycles. So I would suggest walking is not only the form of transportation in which a man proceeds erect, like a man on his own legs under his own power. There is immense satisfaction in that, and also using bicycles. Bicycles are just great. Here you have a dedicated lane for bicycles. People enjoy driving this bicycle around. Often people would suggest that it's conducive to that kind of climate, but remember, Copenhagen is also has a very cold climate, and see the number of cycles over there. Just beautiful, isn't it? You have places where you could park your cycles safely, and very less number of people actually using cars. The congestion has reduced considerably, and this has given space for people to bring out cafeterias. You enjoy your music around and the cafeteria, and people walk around all over. This is Jan Gehl again talking about his famous doing in Copenhagen, and he's replicated this idea across the nation. Jan Gehl is from Denmark, by the way. Here you enjoy a public show, a dancer showing his skills to a gymnast who's doing things, and then there's this nice open green space across with the fountains, people sitting around them. This is Amanda Burden. She talks about New York City and how the influence of moving a chair into wherever you want, into that selected space, in a public open space, sort of creates that nativity and brings in that astuteness in a public space. Here you have some more exercises and stuff happening in open public space, which is superb. It's a recreational way of living, and well, people would often think that how is it possible to do something like this in India, and will it ever be allowed? If we see in India, often these streets are taken over by pandals for our pujas, and you have the Ganesh and Durga and all the gods and goddesses kept onto these pandals. This is a technical thing, so I can view only up to about 100 meters, okay, and there is clear 100 meters, beyond which it's not possible for humans to sort of visualize things. Here you have sculptures, several sculptures put across the area, and here if you see that, did you see that there was this guy moving and the sculpture moving? Yeah, so it's such an illusion that people create. This particular place, I guess, will always be remembered. This is Pompidou Center. This is right in the middle of Paris, and this was a car parking lot which has been converted into a cultural center, which is Pompidou Center. Architect Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers in their early 30s had won this competition design, and this is a beautiful space where people come and live and enjoy. This is another example of a street where you have such large number of people walking in and out. In fact, in New Delhi, they have created the system where they have weekly hearts. So this system of weekly hearts is where the streets are closed for a span of 3 to 4 hours in the evening, and the informal markets spruce up onto the streets where people could go and buy whatever their daily needs are, and they find an alternative street to get into the residential blocks of that area. So that's very interesting as to how people look at streets. Now I will elaborate on the street design principles and very briefly tell you about how streets as a space, as a public space, are great for businesses, how it can be changed, how the streets are becoming an ecosystem for the entire human race to survive, and we need to act now to save our streets, frankly speaking. So the source for this nice logo that we see here, which basically creates for creating equity of streets where cars, motorbikes and people walk exist together. First we will start with, or rather we define street design into 3 parts. One is neighborhood, at neighborhood level, where streets are accustomed to both residential and commercial need. In the second we look at downtown. Downtown streets are the streets which are in the downtown area in commercial belts of the city are generally overcrowded and have a lot of vehicles coming in. So how do you work and design the streets for them? And the third type of street that we look at is where they have mixed use of streets or mixed use of land use available in that area. So here is an example of an existing and proposed downtown two-way street. In a two-way street, the width of the two-ways anywhere between 18 to 30 meters, because the height of the buildings also are in reciprocation to the width of the roads abutting them. You require adequate parking space, and often what you see is the parking takes away a large portion of your streets, and then you have these eaves coming out onto the platform on the sidewalks. So designing these sidewalks for everybody, including the people and people walking, becomes difficult. So the most convenient way of doing things is probably create a cycle lane so that people stop using cars. In downtown areas, if people use cycles, it will be more preferable and more utilized. Since you have to give a dedicated lane to the cycle so that it could be used properly, a traffic island would be most ideal, and this particular traffic island sort of creates a barrier between the pavement, the cyclist, and the motor vehicle. Now when you design a one-way street, how would it be different? Any different? You need to create a refuge. A refuge is again an island or a space where people could walk, walking a 30 meter distance in a one way, or a 18-meter distance in one way is tough, when there's a moving traffic around. So this needs to be sort of looked into, where they create a refuge and a person could walk about 6 meters without creating any interference. So this again, use of buses and public transport, having a dedicated lane of bus or public transport is necessary, and people should enjoy the downtown area. Now this is an example of a neighborhood street. So when you have a large wide road, it's not that the entire spread of right of way or the road being used properly or to appropriate measure. What happens is, when you have wide road and you don't have too much of traffic, there is a lot of weaving that happens, overtaking. People tend to overtake from one lane to the other, switch lanes very quickly, that you could see in the graphic that is existing here. There is a dedicated lane. If there are only, instead of 4 lanes, a 2-lane system, people would stick to their lane and would not weave in here and there. You have to configure the street in such a manner that lanes, people follow lane rules, people follow lane regulations, and there's not enough space for weaving in just like that. Yeah. Now this is a design of a crossing. The most interesting portion of the crossing is that the car needs to see you, that you are crossing in, and the other barrier that has been created in this is the speed table or a tabletop crossing, wherein a person bounded on wheelchair can also cross easily without going in too much onto the ramp or going down too much onto the ramp. And the second thing that you see here is that the vehicles, when they are seeing you approach, so automatically there will be a pause. This is a four road crossing. Now when you see a 3T junction, the distance between the two crossings should be at least 125 feet, otherwise these becomes a collision point. And the line of sight, as you see, the the pedestrian should be able to see the car at any given point of time, so there should be no obstruction along the curb and at the crossings. We'll get into the street design elements and understanding of how restructuring of streets has happened. This is a street which you see as 12, 12, 12, 12, 48 feet street, that is 48 feet of road. And when we redesign the street, look at it how it goes. We created a cycle lane, buffer space of about 3 feet, and created a parking space or a parking lane of about 8 feet for the cars, and then you have a 10 feet and a 10 feet for, or a rather 3 meter by 3 meter of car base, and a bus only road wherein it's a dedicated lane for the bus, the public transport, and non motorized transport, which is your cycle. In this point of time, what happens is, because there are only 2 lanes, people tend to think that the road will be congested and will by far automatically shift to either a non motorized transport or a public transport for faster movement. Now I'll get on to the sidewalk design. Now the most interesting phase of a sidewalk design is that we divide the sidewalk into 3 phases basically. One is the frontage area that you see in front of the shops. Now this varies anywhere between 1.2 to 1.5 meter wide, depending on how wide or how big are the shopping arcades, right? So you would like people to pause, have a look at the display. Window shopping people tend to do, or a cafeteria that could come out onto that 1.5 meter, 1.2 meter, and create space for sitting and eatery. Then you have pedestrian thoroughfare, which should be at least 1.8 meter, 1.5 to 2.2 meters, which is adequate space for about 2.5-3 people to move out. And then you have the street furniture or the curb zone that we call it. This particular zone would be used for not just for sitting and utility and light, but also for trees and parking. Yes, parking, because parking is also a part of the street infrastructure that needs to be put in. And you also have in this case bicycle lane. Well, bicycle lane, it's not possible to provide it everywhere, but essentially should be used and provided in areas, especially in Indian context, in spaces where which is having good access to schools. In neighborhoods which have large number of schools, a bike lane would get children to be children again. I have another video of a bicycle thing lane. This is in Bogota. They created 124 kilometers of bike lane, and that is Enrique Peñalosa, the mayor of Bogota, driving his bicycle. So there is no hierarchy in who should be driving a bicycle. The bicycle is a vehicle of a new mentality. It quietly challenges a system of values which condones dependency, waste, inequality of mobility, and daily carnage. There is every reason why cycling should be helped to enjoy another golden age. This is a quote from World Watch Institute, and James McGurn talks about it. Here you look at it, the cycle lanes, bicycle space are so much fun to enjoy with, move around with the nice landscape on the side and people walking in, whereas the roads there you see are where the motor vehicles are muddled. So this is a decision the mayor of Bogota made, or rather the city made, and city chose cycles over motor vehicle. The most interesting phenomena ever, and people invest in roads because they say that okay, the taxpayers. So taxpayers' money should go into areas which provides them more tax, and often cars and vehicles motor vehicles tend to argue that since they pay the taxes, the road belongs to them, or the road is built because of the tax money that they pay. But essentially, roads were built so that there is an access to the property, so that there is an access for people to move around, not for the cars and motor vehicles to really enjoy that space as to wherever they drive. Thank you. So we're going to talk about another part of the street design, which is curbs and ramps. Now this is the details of things, and I would like you to kindly pay attention on the corners and edges especially. So when you see the edges and corners, edges needs to widen out because when people need to cross out, you'll have a lot of aggregation of people coming onto that corner, waiting for a signal for them to cross over, which is essentially why at the corners and edges you need to have more space. In this particular example that you see here, although there is no tabletop crossing, and there's a slight ramp which moves into it, and then you could go in, and this essentially is the furniture zone that you see here, where you have the car parks and you have the cycle lane besides it, and this has to be like decided by the city authority as to how they implement it. The last thing that in the street design that we're going to talk about is speed control. You would say, why would you want speed control? An increasing traffic fatality every year in India, approximately 1.4 million people die on road accidents every year. 1.3 to 1.5 million people die every year in road accidents, and it's been seen that 90% of the road fatalities occur in developing nations like ours, and the primary reason of these road fatalities are the speed of vehicles. Yes, the speed of vehicles. Now this needs to be controlled. This is essential to control for reducing the number of fatalities that we have on the road. So there are several measures and several ways of doing it. If people or if vehicles are disciplined, zebra crossing would essentially work, or they follow traffic signals. But in a country like India, where we often tend to violate traffic regulations, infrastructure of this nature where you have speed tables and speed cushion will help in reducing vehicular speed. In a city like Amsterdam and whole of Holland and Denmark, they have systems called WNUF. In the neighborhood streets, they cobble the streets so that the people could the walking speed is equal to, or rather the vehicle speed is equal to the walking speed, which is about 10 to 12 kilometers per hour, and this is done essentially to reduce fatality, and so that even children could enjoy playing on the roads. Okay, so this is what we've been talking about street designs, and in the next session I'll just basically talk about public plaza and public space. In the public plaza, riverfront development, or rather water edges, and about the space that about urban agriculture and urban forestry. Thank you.